must be skeptical of absolutely everything. Above all, this is a war of propaganda.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
You only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes, plenty of evidence. I
strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers.
Now, of course I am minimising my tax, and if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads ripped. Because as a government, I can tell you, you're not spending it that well that we should be donating extra.
The easy answer is this. If we continue to send our children to Caesar for their education, we need to stop being surprised when they come home as Romans.
Welcome to another episode of Fringe Frequencies. I'm Jason Gowans, and this is
Cody Carriopa.
And today we're going to be talking about Freemasonry with our good friend Wes, and his experience with his own father and Freemasonry, and all the stories that he's prepared to share with us today, to whatever extent that may be. So thanks for coming, everybody. And we've been away for 3 weeks now?
Yeah, I think 3 weeks
with
without a cast, yeah.
Flus, colds, a few family things going on. And you can probably hear I'm still a little bit congested. I'm not contagious. I actually am, so now you've all got it. But yeah, so it's good to be back. Good to be back in the saddle. And welcome to our good friend Wes.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Tell us who you are.
My name's Wes. I'm part of the church that I attend with these two good fellows. I'm a local to the Sunbury area just recently, and yeah, happy to share my story tonight.
Yeah, awesome. So we had a desire, Jason and I, to talk about Freemasonry because, you know, even when I was younger, back in my tinfoil hat days, I thought it was quite fringe. You know, it was an interesting thing to look into. The sort of rumors about Freemasonry and the mystique about it was almost alluring to me. You know, and so you know, I think it's probably one of the most famous secret societies as far as oxymorons go. You know, it's the most famous, I think, you know, but I've never known anyone to be involved in it. I've never known anyone to have family members involved in it. There's quite a few spiritual people in my family and they're involved in different religions and beliefs, but no Scientologists and no Freemasons. So, I was...
As we were talking about before, like, you know, at least for myself as well, like a couple of generations back, there have been some Freemasons, and my mum happened to, it's funny, just before we started, she had a Freemasonry Bible, and she said that she put it in the fire and it just wouldn't burn. It wouldn't burn. It wouldn't burn. So I don't know what that means, but anyway, bit of an anecdote. But yeah, share with us a little bit about, I guess, your upbringing in general, where you're from, your father, and I guess your own young experiences with Freemasonry, at least from your perspective as I'm assuming a young man up until whatever age you were.
Yep. So Freemasonry for me when I was growing up was very normalised because my father was a Freemason and my two uncles were Freemasons and my grandfather was a Freemason. So I thought lodge life was pretty normal for people. So, we grew up in Berlin. The lodge was down in Heidelberg on Upper or Lower Heidelberg Road. And, as kids we used to go with Dad to the lodge. The lodge had Christmas parties and things, so it was very normalised for us that Dad would get dressed up and he'd go to this, you know, place called the lodge. You know, was never spoken about what went on there. But, I remember as a child just thinking it was just perfectly normal that, you know, probably most dads would, you know, be going to lodge. So, yeah.
When you say he would get ready and get dressed, what do you mean? So are you saying like dressed up in like a church suit, or something?
Yeah, so I remember there was a cupboard. We had a linen press. We had a linen press in the house, and it was like Dad's cupboard. The shotgun was in there, the 22 was in there, and his lodge stuff was in there. So
Which one was more dangerous? No, I'm kidding.
No one ever went to this cupboard to do anything because, like, what were you doing with the guns or Dad's Freemasonry stuff? But there was like a set of tails in there, and I think another a dinner suit and some other suit. And aside from that, there was a bunch of accessories that went with it. So when Dad would get dressed,
What day of the week was that?
I
Usually,
can't remember. No,
How old would you have been?
probably from my first memories, probably around 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
Yep. So Dad would get dressed, and Mum would always help him. You know, it was a big deal to look right. I don't know why, but it seemed to take. I remember that it was almost like a bit of a frantic energy at home, where Dad would be getting ready for lodge. You know, and all his stuff had to be there, and he had to look a certain way, and then, yeah, he'd finally be ready, and off he'd go.
And did he take you guys along with him sometimes?
Not to a meeting, no.
No. And what about having the, lodge members to your house?
Yep. So I didn't really know who was part of the lodge, but I just knew that we had all these friends in the neighbourhood, and I didn't really ever pick up the commonality. Like, they weren't Dad's work colleagues, they weren't his friends from his past. And I guess looking back, they were the lodge people. So they were sort of spread. We were in Bulleen, growing up in the baby boomers age, so it was all a new estate back then. And so there was a lot of young families, and yeah, a lot of these men that would, Dad's friends would be lodge members. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you so you were mentioning it was like 6 or 7 you knew that he was going to the lodge. Did that continue on up into your teens or up into your early 20s? Like did he seem like a or was it like he was a committed member of the lodge and this was something that happened every week, or
Yep.
And it was consistent throughout your sort of upbringing?
Yeah, he never left the lodge. As far as I know, he was always in the lodge. So
Up until your mid to late teens, or?
no, right through life. Like,
Okay.
Yeah.
Even when you left home.
yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess my first like natural question is, I know it's a weird natural question to ask. Looking back, can you see how his involvement with Freemasonry affected you as a family, or even as his son? Could you see certain, like, was there any kind of cultural thing? Was there anything you saw that was like, because obviously you were saying like you kind of expected it, most dads go to the lodge. Was there something that you look back now and you go, oh no, we did that because, Dad was a Freemason?
Not really. I think the contacts Dad had. So I know there were some influential people in the lodge. There was a particular set of brothers who owned the amusement rides for the Melbourne show.
Wow, okay.
And so they were part of the lodge because Dad used to give me his business card and say, go and see these 2 men. I even remember one of their names, but I won't mention it. And I'd go and give this bloke I'd ask for him, ask the Carney guys, and they'd say, oh, he's over there in that caravan. I'd go in and he'd just give me sheets of ride tickets.
Yep.
So
There'd been known, from what I understand as well, yeah, there's a lot of business people, and obviously because they're all kind of looking out for each other in that regard. Yeah.
I personally don't know really, like there's obviously belief differences between something like Scientology and Freemasonry, but I sort of associate it with the same thing, like it's about power and money, Would you say that's true? Or would you say that there's a far more spiritual side of those particular beliefs? Not so much Scientology, but obviously.
I guess the question there would be, do you know much about Scientology?
not really, no.
Yeah, I guess. So I wouldn't be able to compare the.
Well, what would you say you do know about Freemasonry, like, or about what the sort of? Because I have really anecdotal knowledge about what goes on, not only in the lodge but in history, as Freemasonry has sort of supposedly shaped a lot of history.
So the lodge to us when we were growing up, I was in the boy cubs, boy cubs, and it sort of reminded me of that, where everyone would get dressed up and you'd go and do this thing, and no one else was allowed in, and that's what sort of resonates with me with the lodge, that it was sort of a bit sacred. It wasn't something to be messed with. When we did as kids, I think once or twice we went to go up to the lodge hall. And I remember that being a really big deal, like Dad being really concerned about us being in this hall where they'd have their ceremonies, I guess. But it was largely kept very secret from the kids. Like, we didn't know what Dad did at lodge. I asked him many times. I'd say, what do you do at the lodge? And he'd say, we do men's business.
Wow.
And, yeah.
It's like, even someone very close to it, there's still that mystique, there's still that sort of secrecy. You know, was there an impression that you got that he started early, that it was a family thing, like you mentioned, uncles being involved and.
Yeah, so we grew up. We were going to the Methodist church. Dad wouldn't come to church. He'd go and play golf on Sundays, so that was his thing. And he'd play with members of the lodge. I remember that. But yeah, we were just sort of, I guess, fragmented that way. Like we were in the church and Dad was with his lodge people. But I've sort of forgotten the question now. I don't know where I was going with that.
Just where how your dad got involved in it.
Oh, there, yeah. I can't remember Dad starting at the lodge, but my mother's father, so my grandfather, was part of the lodge.
What did your father do for work?
So he was a business rep. He was an engineer by trade, and
So he was in business.
yeah. But I used to go to work with Dad, I guess, on the school holidays, and we'd travel all over Melbourne. You know, he's a sales rep, and he'd be dropping into these places. I was allowed into some places and not allowed into others. Sometimes it was a house, and sometimes it was a factory, and sometimes it was an office. And yeah, I look back on those days and I think, gee, you know, he was so welcomed at some of these places and so well known.
What was he up to?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always.
Your father was so you're Scottish background, right? So your father is he? I'm digging in a bit here, but your father was he an immigrant to Australia, or was he Australian born?
So we're 7 generations. I'm 7th generation Australian.
Okay.
Wow.
So we had a McKinnon Bible at home that dated back to the land settlers in South Australia. So we had that history, but
Criminals from way back, huh?
yeah. Well, some of it does look pretty shady, actually, when you look at it. I think at one particular point, someone was classified as a dealer in Richmond. And, you know, if you tell someone I'm a dealer in Richmond these days, you'd be thinking, what sort of a dealer are you? But my dad's father wasn't in the lodge. So it sort of came from mum's side. And mum's sister's husbands were part of the lodge. So they're my uncles on that side.
And you were saying your dad wouldn't go to church.
No.
But your mum obviously was the driving force going to the Methodist church.
Yep.
How do you think that came about? That from your mum's side, both the Freemasonry came and the church came. How did that come about?
I think it was the same when she was growing up, that her mother would go to church and grandpa used to just stay at home or do something else. So the men were never involved in the church.
That's interesting, you know.
And Freemasons aren't necessarily opposed to people going to church either. No, it's not like it's not at least not at the low levels. Not from what I can see.
So yeah, they all had their things. I think one of my uncles, my Uncle Max, was in Rotary, a Rotary group, and you know, I sort of felt like the lodge was part of that. It was like this charity.
It looks the same, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like.
I always associated them together. I always thought the Rotary Club and the sort of the lodge was similar. You know, That's another Rotary Club. I don't know much about the Rotary Club.
Rotary Club's it doesn't have any association in Masonic. It's just it's an international non-for-profit, just helping people in the environment in general. You could say humanitarian projects, as far as you can see on the surface, anyway.
Okay.
But so with the degrees, I guess we're talking about your dad would sort of be hush hush, don't come into the hall. I mean, to what degree, other than your experience as a child, have you, given your experiences as a child and what you grew up with and seeing your dad being a part of Masonic, did you actually go and look into, outside of what you grew up with, look into it as a whole to find out what it was all about externally?
Yeah, I got a bit suspicious later on. I did a counselling diploma when I was a bit younger, and you had to pick people that needed therapy. And so I picked on my mum. And I sat down with her one afternoon and just sort of gave her this CBT, this cognitive behaviour therapy, and she opened up and she told me about Dad and his behaviours. And it was pretty shocking. Like, she was in tears, and I felt like I was burdened with this huge secret that she'd been carrying for years. But I got suspicious whether that had anything to do with the lodge.
Are you at liberty to share with us, at least in minor detail, about what you mean by behaviours?
Yeah, so it appeared from Mum that Dad was a sexual predator. So,
okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of women that Mum was too embarrassed to walk out of the house because she'd say to me that just about every woman in the street Dad slept with.
Okay.
And I thought, how could you do that? Like, not just
logistically.
Yeah. How could you have done that? So she bore this great shame that she shared with me, and later on I started thinking, because she told me all sorts of stories about some of the guys from Lodge that he'd invite over, wanting to have sex with Mum, and Mum was just dead against it. She was a strong Christian. So, yeah, I wondered, later on I started thinking about, was that part of the Lodge, or
what age were you, if you don't mind me asking, what age were you when your mum revealed this stuff to you?
About 35.
Okay, so much older. Okay, yeah. Were you how would you describe it? Were you shocked at the time, or did you felt like you kind of knew something was strange in there?
No, Dad was always a mystery. Like, he was always a mystery. So this was just like a piece of the puzzle. Dad was one of those dads where he'd say, let's go fishing. You'd jump in the car and drive 2 hours up the bush. He wouldn't speak a word to you. You'd get out of the car, you'd start fishing, and he'd go for a walk for 3 hours and come back and you go home. Okay. So he was a very silent man, but he was a sales rep and he had the gift of the gab. So to others, he could, talk a lot.
Two different,
to the family, he was very... Very reserved. Yep.
2 different personas. Okay.
100%.
You mentioned something, and I know you're probably still halfway through your explanation as to what inspired you to look further into Freemasonry, right? But you mentioned something. You said your mum was under the impression that your dad was a sexual predator. Now, did you mean he was a womanizer? Did she mean he was just a womanizer, or were there particular, like, real negative traits as to how he would try and solicit sex, I guess, it
was never obvious. Like, back in those days, you'd have a lot of parties at home, and you'd go to parties and things like that, dinner dances and things. And I never remember seeing Dad being, having predatory behaviour or anything like that. So yeah, I guess it was
because it wasn't quite overt, was it? It's not like now.
No,
it was a lot more, let's say, disguised.
But it was very. I always get the feeling it was a lot looser back in the day, like, and people would turn a blind eye more than not. But please continue,
Yeah, so there's a lot of shame about families and things back then. So, Mum probably didn't open up about it to anyone because she felt the shame of, being burdened with this as the wife. She told me that he'd brought home diseases and all sorts of things, and it was pretty shocking for her to tell me that. And I was pretty devastated, feeling like I'm one of 6 kids and I'm the only kid that knows this stuff. So I had to share it with my sisters and just sort of work out how I would do that, just to take that burden off them. And then we're repainting a picture of Dad because this mystery Dad, now we've got some insight to.
And was it so that sparked your investigation into, okay, well, is this about Freemasonry? What did you uncover?
So I just started looking on the internet, of course, and a lot of the conspiracy stuff, but I listened to a guy I think he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he sort of talked about the Catholic Church and the relationship to the Masonics or the Freemasons and how it's all strung together and how it's really old. And
do you know his name? Is he a professor?
Yes.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, What's Up, Prof is one of the segments they do.
I thought you were going to say
sounds familiar to me.
There's a New Zealand Christian guy. He's a very similar vein, and he wrote several very prominent books, but I know who you're talking about. I forget his name though.
Yeah. So he mentioned they had a book, and I'd never seen this book at home and stuff. And I thought, wow, it's a lot more advanced and covert than I'd ever imagined it to be.
Your father's book, or the book that the professor had written?
The book that they talk about for the Masons, the Freemasons book. Yeah.
So, what was your takeaways? Because obviously there's a lot to sift through when you look into Freemasonry, and there's real fringy stuff, obviously, like there's real outrageous stuff. Was there something there that resonated particularly about what this professor was saying?
Not really, not for me, and how I'd observed my father growing up or my uncles and things like that. When I got to the age of 18, my father said to me, "You've got to make a decision this year whether you're going to join the lodge." And I thought, this is really weird, like he hadn't mentioned anything about it, and then comes to me and says, and I'm picture me sort of long hair and earrings and driving a Sandman panel van, The lodge is the last place I could see myself, So I just plain out said to him, I don't want to be a part of the lodge.
Was there pressure?
No, but I could see a bit of disappointment in Dad's eyes. Like, he didn't show much emotion, but this was a bit of a, another thing that the son had let him down with.
Yeah, yep. And so once you had looked into it and you didn't necessarily associate his behaviours that your mum had shared with you with Freemasonry, was that sort of it? You never really delved into it again?
I sometimes wonder. I wonder, like, how organised they are in that, sharing of their wives and the sexual behaviours that sort of went with it.
Yeah.
Dad was never a drinker, so there was no alcohol in the house. So, if there was alcohol, I could sort of understand it, having a friend over and getting drunk, and if you're that way inclined, sort of it could lead to that. But Dad was always sober, he was...
Would you say that your uncles and your other family members involved in the lodge were also secretive? They had that secretive nature?
Not so much. My other uncles I actually got along with well, and they were a lot more open, but I don't think they were I don't remember them doing their masters like Dad did, and, I probably would have heard that at one of the family barbecues, so I feel like Dad was a lot more dedicated to the lodge than they were.
And what dedicated means is the interesting question. What does it mean? Like, what does it mean to be dedicated? Like I said, various... and you've probably read just as much as I have, where there's different levels of commitment, and they require different levels of sacrifice in a metaphorical sense and in a real sense. And what those actually are, there's obviously various interpretations of what actually goes on, and of course that same Seventh-day Adventist professor, he also discusses the Jesuit order. And along the lines of essentially, you have levels and you don't say anything. You once you get to a certain level, you're not allowed to speak, and if you do, it's a death sentence. It's almost that extreme. Once you get sort of past the sort of the community minded ones who run a Masonic aged care like we have in my hometown in New Zealand. One of my good friends, actually, Caleb, who we had on, that hall that he runs the restaurant out of.
Yeah, it's an old Mason hall.
It's an old Mason hall, and we used to have school rock concerts in it because it was an old Mason hall, and they still owned it, and then it got repurposed and now it finally got sold. But the Masons still have an aged care in town and what have you. But from my understanding, that there's the very low level stuff that we all kind of see, a hall here and some community stuff like Rotary, and then there's a whole different level which politicians seem to be involved in, high-ranking business people seem to be involved in, every single Hollywood star seems to be involved in. It's ridiculous. Like, it's on a scale where it's just like once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. There's a theme. There's a general theme. There's almost like a parallel world. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does to some degree. I guess when I have done this research and I read some of the things, they seem pretty far-fetched because it sounds so extreme. It's sort of hard to comprehend, especially thinking back that Dad might have been part of that.
Which is part of the way it's hidden, right? Because it sounds so far-fetched.
Yeah.
I think you shared something with me a little while ago, and it's like this funny thing where we know there's always a little bit of truth in jokes, but we talked about, even with Jace before, the goat. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that little?
Yeah, so my uncles and my father used to joke with me particularly because I was the oldest boy sort of all the families. And they'd muck around with me and say, we'll bring him down the lodge and bring out the goat. And I was like, what? What do you mean bring out the goat? And I'd ask Dad, what's the goat? Do you really have a goat down there? And when we went to the lodge, I'd walk around the back expecting that there was a goat there. But, I had no idea what this joke about the goat was.
Do you think it was a reference to like actual live goat sacrifice, or do you think it was like an idol that they had, or like a an element that they had, this statue or something?
Yeah, I think it probably was some sort of, because in the hall, I remember going up to the hall when I was young, and there being like seats everywhere, but almost set up like a courtroom. So there was stuff in the middle of the room, and it was surrounded by seats on one side. And I was like,
have you ever, on that topic, have you ever noticed that our parliamentary halls, whether it's the Beehive in New Zealand or whether it's an ACT, where the federal government is. Have you always noticed that it looks like a Masonic hall?
Yeah.
Anyway, just thought. Anyway, sorry, carry on. We're allowed these organic moments. Sorry. Yeah.
So one thing Dad had at home was a hammer, like a judge's hammer, and it had a
gaffles. What do they call them? Yep.
Gaffle, yeah, I think it is. And it had an emblem on the side, I remember, because as kids we used to take it and pretend we were the judge of the house, all that sort of stuff. But in the room, in the hall, there was a chair where there was another one of these gaffles, sitting quite high. So it sort of looked like someone would proceed over whatever was going on in there in this big chair. Yeah. And had a big rug, I'm pretty sure, and like blue carpet everywhere and this big rug in the middle. And I'm fairly sure it had a pattern. I can't remember what the pattern was.
Yeah, look, I mean, as far as this, the extremeness of this and that kind of stuff, obviously it is. Obviously there is a level of, I guess from an outsider, bizarreness that must go on in there. And I think even anyone who's not initiated understands that the people who are involved in this take it very seriously. Like it's like sacred ground, or it's taboo to even talk about it in some way,
At least in public, yeah.
Yeah, because and this is how I think secret societies run. Like I think the more extreme they are, the longer they last. So when it comes to Scientology, or as an example, I know that's not the same. When it comes to the
Scientology is just funny.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I get the same feeling. So
Scientologists take themselves too seriously. They have all their secret investigators, and you're talking about us. It's like, come on, guys, like a god who runs the universe and some dude who made up a make believe, thing about some aliens coming, and literally he didn't even believe it.
Oh, L. Ron Hubbard was pretty interesting. I don't think
he's funny.
I wonder if he actually. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but my boss at my old job, was approached by Scientologists, and they did the test with him where he has to hold on to the electric things and he has to do an interview, and they, I don't know what they do.
I forget what they call that. It's it's almost it's like a defragging of your mind. I forget the word. Yeah.
They were very interested in him, and he seems. He was a very smart man. He was an engineer. He was a fitter and turner from way back, and he was very. The way he sort of described it to me is like, I seem to be the exact kind of person they wanted. I had a very successful business. I was. He's like, you had to sit perfectly still. You couldn't blink. He's like, and I love that stuff. I love it. And long story short, he said, they almost promised me riches. They almost promised me these things, and he said the only thing that got me weird about, and he's a great judge of character, this my old boss. He said, man, they were just weird. They were weird, as if they were trying to live in like two different worlds. And he's a really insightful man, and the way he described it was, and we used to joke about it. We used to joke about what they must do in the shadows. Like what are they doing back there? And it was always stuff like they'd put on the big golden robes and they'd like walk around and everyone's their slave. And it's funny because I
think it's a lot more nefarious than that.
Well, that's the thing. That's that seems to be like the main run. Like you think of the what are they called, the Skull and Bones crew? The guys.
There's lots of different like offshoots. Yeah.
No one's ever really explained to me the whole getting dressed up thing though. That was the big impression I had. Like he had to be so well, dressed in his lodge uniform, I'd call it.
What did it look like? So you said coat and tails. So do you mean like a tux?
Yeah, tails, like a dinner suit.
Yeah.
With the long tails.
Yeah.
They wouldn't wear a hat or anything, but they'd have like badges, the compass, just different stuff hanging off them. His accoutrements, I guess they are. And then he'd disappear and be gone at this lodge for hours on end. And I'd think, what does he do? Like, what do they do down there? It was such a,
elaborate.
Well, after a while, you'd ask him and you get a few years older and you'd ask him and you'd never get any answers and you just sort of give up on it and go, well, who knows what they do? Who cares what they do?
There's a leading into that. there's going right back to, I guess the your mum's revelations. Not to get in too deep there, but there's a pastor not a pastor, but he's an ex-pastor in New Zealand who wrote a series of good books on the Masons. Very insightful. Getting into that, your father, is he still alive?
No,
he
passed away.
How many years ago did he pass away?
2001.
Do you mind asking? Did he die of old age? Was he sick or?
He had a heart attack. Yeah.
Okay. How was his health? Sort of leading up to that.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Used to referee basketball twice a week. Play golf. Very, very active. He smoked, but he gave up. So yeah.
Man, he must have been pretty young. What was he in his 70s?
62.
62. Yeah,
That's quite young.
Yep.
One of the assertions from this individual who had studied the Masons extensively, he said one of the themes through Mason families, especially those who were deep into it, was either they passed away young, or they had various health issues and conditions, much higher statistically than most other families. It was almost like there was a curse upon them.
God's judgment.
Well, yeah, it's almost like there's like a curse upon it. Did you? I mean, I guess maybe not one of those things that you remember because it's not something you were sort of pinpointed on. But did you notice any sort of ill health amongst Mason members or anything like that? Anything that sort of could pique your memory?
Not really.
Man,
No.
I'll go further than that. Like being spiritual yourself and being sensitive to some degree, at least, to the spiritual realm. Did you feel any oppression? Did you feel a bad spirit or anything about it? Was there? Because I mean, I won't try and paint up the question too much. Did you sense anything?
Not really, but when I was born, I had eczema and asthma, quite severe. So back then, medications weren't what they are today. And so one particular night, the doctor had given Mum something for me, and I started hallucinating, like really strong hallucinations.
When was this, sorry?
When I was about 4 years old.
Yeah, okay.
And they were having a party at the time. So I always remember thinking, I'm going to die while they're dancing, sort of things. There was all this music going on, and I had walls and ceilings creeping in on me and all sorts of stuff. So I'm trying to explain that I was pretty sick as a young kid, so the sickness was on me. Yeah. By the time I'd rebelled against Mum and Dad, and I was, 18 or 17, I'd started smoking marijuana, going out with my mates, and all my health issues went away. So it's almost like, to me, it's just so contradictory that I started really behaving badly and I got better.
Yeah, okay, that's strange. It's very strange. Your siblings, how many siblings do you have?
I'm one of 6.
You're one of 6. Any other boys?
One boy, so there's 17 years gap between me and my younger brother.
Okay. And he didn't really get to experience the lodge or the comings and goings of it, no?
It's strange. I've never actually spoken to him about it.
Okay.
And I think that's sort of like part of it, that once it gets shut down and Dad's not talking about it, that no one talks about it in the family. You don't talk about it to your siblings. We don't. It's just one of those subjects you don't talk about.
Bruno. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even to my uncles, that I was a lot more open with, we'd never talk about lodge. They'd never.
So no one in the family carried it on.
No,
not that you know of.
No.
Yeah. What about the uncles?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the uncles had 3 daughters, and I don't think you can be a girl in the lodge. I don't remember any women in the lodge. The other one had an adopted son, but he's a bit of a tearaway, so yeah, he would have never made it into the lodge. I don't know how they could have invited me when I was such a rat bag back then.
Oh, look, I reckon your dad was pretty high up, man. I reckon your dad was pretty high up. Like, I think about, like, you mentioned that he was sleeping with women on the street, if that was common knowledge to those people, he must have had some kind of
authority,
something to not only protect him, but also to fall back on, like if, and I'm assuming, were these women all single that he was? No. They were family friends and stuff like that. When Mum started sharing, I was like,
wow, how did we
How
go
did you
to those?
interact?
Yeah, how
Yeah.
did we go to those places? So I sort of look at it now that I'm a Christian and I understand a lot more about the Bible, and I feel like Dad had some power, that he could trance these women or something like that, because he wasn't exactly the most handsome man. He wasn't well built. He didn't drive a flash car. He didn't have plenty of money. We grew up quite poor. So,
or else there was like some authority that he perhaps had with regards to the way they operated and ritual. Could have been various different things you wouldn't know, I guess.
but some of the families, those same fathers, weren't in the church.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's hard to say what is feeding what, because was the type of person he was is what made him, seemingly important in the lodge. I think it could work both ways, bro. But at the same time, it's, pretty clear that there was a lot going on in his life, and you knew none of it. And that to me, that level of secrecy to me, and this is just my own impression, like that. Like, just this idea that he'd take you fishing and then go missing for hours and then we're done, son. He was obviously up to something.
I think it just proves a point that, if at a family level, when you're living with people day to day, you don't know what's going on, then it's quite easy to fool anybody else externally about the intentions, the purposes, what's actually happening, and it kind of undermines the whole premise of, oh, well, you can't assume that something secret's going on. That's just so far-fetched. It's like, well, if you can't see these things when you're actually a family member and you're close by, someone will only reveal what they want to.
It's like serial killer stuff, man. That's dark hidden secrets stuff. And it's so antithetical to the Bible. The way that the man of the house is supposed to lead his family is with transparency and integrity. And by example, and I think it's interesting that he asked you to join the lodge. Maybe he didn't even really want you to say yes, but he kind of did, so he could maybe show, I don't know, I'm just, but it's like he didn't say anything about it, just left it up to you, and then right on 18, he's like, yep, do you want to join the lodge?
Are you able to share that, are you able to say where that lodge was? Is it still there today, the same lodge you went to?
I believe it is, yeah. It's opposite Kentucky Fried Chicken in Heidelberg. There's a big car yard deal.
I know where it
it's
is.
just behind the courts.
Yeah, I know where it
it's
is.
right behind the courts and the police station.
Yeah.
Right behind the courts and the police station. Was it right behind the courts and the police station back then?
Yep. That's the old courthouse, where the police station was always attached to the courthouse.
We grew up.
Oh, so the lodge is the old courthouse, or the lodge is by the courthouse?
No, the lodge is back. It faces, I think it's Lower Heidelberg Road. Is that where Warringal Village is?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We used to drive past it a lot,
Is it still in use today?
We went to the hospital.
I have no
or
idea.
it was.
They're still operating today?
I haven't been there.
Maybe we have to do a part. We have to do a part two.
Well, I'll say, like, there were several
Actually, I'm looked it up.
Masonic halls that we would drive past. Like, they're not hiding; they're there.
It had the symbol at the front.
At the front. Masonic hall. It'd have the Mason hall, or whatever it would say, out the front. I remember saying, Dad, what is that place? He goes, son, stay away from that place, mate. And I don't even know why he said that, but he knew something, And that was when I was about 13, 14, But he was a Christian, so it was, I think he had a feeling that it was darkness anyway. But I think it's so bizarre that to think your dad was so secretive, and that at 35 your mum opened up about this stuff. That's crazy,
Yeah, she'd lived with it a long time. I guess the other thing is, my dad's father used to come over on a Saturday. So my dad was a bookmaker on Saturday, so he'd go to the races and take the bets and all that stuff. Yeah. And when his father would come, they wouldn't talk. It'd just be they'd play cards and just sort of grumble. And I think they both did card school when they were younger, so they spoke this different language when they were playing cards. So this card language.
Yeah.
But they never spoke, so I thought it was sort of normal for Dad to be that secretive and reserved, because that's how it looked in my house with males.
Yeah. Are you finding yourself actively fighting that, or desiring to be very different, and you have to work on it?
Probably some of Dad's traits. So he's pretty angry. He used to get really angry, and that was something I had to really tame with my son, and I've got two now, so I see that coming out of me sometimes where I'm almost acting out as he tried to do with me. But yeah,
look, it was something definitely I struggled with. You know, like it's funny. I was talking about this with my pastor, Pastor Eddie, and it's like you don't even know the attributes that creep in from your dad. You know, and I'm sure it's the same for girls with their mums or even girls with their dads and me with my mum, you know. But upon close examination, you start to see similarities, you know. I can say confidently at 18, I probably would have said yes. I probably would have said, yeah, Dad, get me in the lodge. What's going on in there? You know? And for me, that's terrifying because I would have been right into all that stuff, you know.
We've got a few, so this is Freemasons Victoria. So it's about us at Freemasons Victoria. At Freemasons Victoria, we believe in a community built on true friendship, compassion, and honesty. Our mission is to be meaningful and relevant organisation in the 21st century that empowers lodges, members in the community by providing leadership, guidance, administrative support systems to ensure the perpetuity of Freemasonry in this state. I don't even know what they just said there.
Yeah.
That's a word salad to me.
What a filibuster.
So what is Freemasonry? It is the oldest and largest existing fraternal organisation in the world with a rich history to draw from. Freemasonry is also a vibrant modern organisation that has changed with the times. They still haven't told you what it is. They just told you about it, but not what it is. Freemasonry is a worldwide society that has brought together millions of people. Notice that they still haven't told you what it is. In a fraternal manner of all nations, religions, political beliefs, and all social backgrounds. It comprises an estimated 6 million members worldwide, with those 7,500 in Victoria. It's a lot. Modern Freemasonry traces its origins to before the 17th century, proudly preserves the traditions it has inherited from those times. These traditions make Freemason unique within the community. 300-year global history, 233 lodges in Victoria, 7,500 members in Victoria, and 6 million worldwide. So this is the whole page.
Yeah,
so these are just for our members here, maybe they can zoom in on this. This is the nice, lovely photo of guys handing out, I don't know if our trusty guy can zoom in on this here. Lovely guys smiling while they're giving away fruit.
Look, honestly, it's for me, it's like the definition of a secret society, you know, where on the surface, they literally say nothing about what they do. You know, this is, I don't know if you could call them a cult, but it was one of the criteria my brother-in-law was trying to figure out if I was in a cult when I joined the church, when I was born again, when I accepted Christ. He was like, Cody, you're in a cult. Like, this is cult. Look, we went through this checklist, and he's like, these are the identifiers that you know you're in a cult. And it was so funny. Some of them were genuinely like, you know, he was sort of misapplying them. You know, he thought that I thought, or at least that the Baptist church that I attend thought that Eddie was like Messiah, you know, like Eddie's our one source of truth or whatever. But long story short, a couple of them were really legitimate. It's like, okay, so their teachings are behind closed doors. You can't actually hear about what they're teaching you, you know, unless you make commitments to join or make assurances not to share it. So that was a big one, and I agree.
Wouldn't it be fun to freak some of your friends out one time and they say, man, you're in a cult. You're like, you believe that this one guy's like Messiah. It's like, look, if you come along and just listen to him, he's brilliant. Like, we're going to go off on a spaceship with him. He's like, just roll them up. You know?
Some of that's true, bro. Like, seriously.
Just roll people up.
Like, exalting a dead person. So usually in a cult, there's a dead person that everyone sort of looks to as the prophet or something like that.
You mean like Jesus?
Well, yeah, like Jesus, right?
So I'm just trying to be consistent here.
No, but more contemporary. So it would be like L. Ron Hubbard, or it might be Joseph Smith,
a Jewish rabbi.
Yeah.
Some Jewish sects.
So
do that as well.
someone contemporary, not someone's like Muhammad or Jesus or Buddha or something. That, you know, this was not what. So it was someone contemporary within the last, you know, few hundred years. And one of the interesting things that I find is that, you know, it's like this normalization. You know, like, yeah, we know behind closed doors there's something dicey going on, but even your dad was able to retain a level of normalcy that didn't arouse suspicion, you know, and that for me is like, whoa, we're crazy. Humans are crazy. Like, we can put on, Steve Irwin said it. Steve Irwin said, he was asked in an interview, don't you get scared of the crocodile? Like it can bite your face off. And he said, oh, don't worry. The crocodile's going to bite my face off. That's fine. But humans, they'll shake your hand first.
There's so much truth in that. Human beings, if you look at all of God's creation, we're the only ones that buck the role that he gave us. We're the only piece of creation, generally speaking, that buck the role that he gave us, and we don't stay in our place. We don't stay in our place. A crocodile will eat a bunch of things and give you a big smile and rip your head off. But yeah, sure, it's designed to do that. A lion will eat meat and stuff, but they're doing what God did. If you took I'm not saying human beings are the virus. Sin is the virus, but it's in humans. If you took human beings off the planet for 300 years, the amazing part about the way God's designed the world, it would go back to its original state.
Oh, I don't think so, bro.
I do.
No.
I do. It's an organism. I 100% do.
Well, the purpose of creation is humanity.
Entropy for the most part, in terms of things breaking down, the diseases we've brought in, gain of function with obviously viruses. Entropy is heightened, and it's just gone through the roof because of what we've done to the planet.
Agreed, but taking us out is not going to change it. So fallen creation.
It's not going to get rid of moral. Okay, it's not going to get rid of the moral state, but of course, our animals aren't moral agents.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, until sin is dealt with and creation is returned by God to an Eden state, the world is going to come to an end regardless of what happens. And I think, God says...
I know it's a bit hypothetical to say, what would actually happen. But
it's getting more theological than it needs to. But the reality is, bro, I think, our rebellion against God is what caused creation to fall, right? So I mean, you mentioned, these animals are doing what they're designed to do. I don't think so, bro. I don't think, the lion was supposed to eat meat. I don't know. Maybe.
So we don't know. The issue we have with that is we don't know how, if you don't have, for example, flies, what do flies do? Flies are part of that relationship whereby they lay maggots and they then spread all of their energy from that rotting carcass back in there, which worms get. It's a cycle. So I actually think that I have to, because of science, believe that death within the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom is part of the process.
No, it's not, bro.
That's really hard to debunk scientifically, though.
Let me put it this way, right? So
because then we're getting off topic here. But
I love it. I love it. This is what we want.
The problem is if you say that that's not built in, then you have to make an argument to say, well, at what point does the population of lions or tigers or elephants stop? Is there going to be a set amount of those on the planet and they just live forever? What happens to their dung? You know what I mean? You know, are they just going to keep breeding ad infinitum and then all of a sudden we're just a big planet of elephants or whatever animal you want to pick up? If there's no kind of regeneration and death itself in the non-moral kingdom is necessarily a bad thing, obviously for us. So that's the issue you have. Yeah.
So two things I would say is that, number one, in a pre-fallen world, we know at 100% there was no human death. We know that. But the Bible does say death didn't enter into the world but by sin, right? So are we going to say that when... Okay,
you good point there. Sin. So death didn't enter the world but by sin. What is the connection with sin? Humans.
Yeah.
That's the connection.
But
is it talking about the morality here as it pertains to human beings, or is it referring to the world as a whole with animals? We don't know.
Look, I don't know either. Yeah. So because a lot of people argue, there must have been plant death. There must have been some kind of death, and I honestly can't argue it from a scientific standpoint. From a theological standpoint, I can argue there was no death until sin came. And I can say.
But theology and science, I don't think, are mutually exclusive.
No. And I can say that God created the world in 6 literal days. I can say that and not have an issue with it. My problem is that when Adam and Eve left the garden, they were covered in animal skins, and that to me is a foundation to say that, they required them. God gave it to them for a reason. So obviously the animal death was significant. It wasn't I'm of the opinion that, this was clandestine. It was something.
We did a big segue here, didn't we? From Freemasons.
I'm waiting for the link back. It's not.
Well, the link back is that Adam was the first Freemason. You know?
No, let me say this though. Let me say this. Something I've noticed about secret societies and specifically the Masonic Lodge is they have so much insight into biblical stuff.
Esoteric knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. So like even things like animal sacrifice.
Hidden knowledge.
Yeah. Like I sort of joked about it before the podcast, you know, these Freemasons know more about the Bible than some Christians, you know, and I honestly think that's true, you know. They kind of tap into it to understand history, humanity, you know. Eddie will talk about it, and he talks about, you know, these guys know where the world's going, so they make preparations.
Well, a lot of these, here's an interesting fun fact for you, is that you've probably heard about astral projection. You know what that is? Like, it's a very real thing. You can be done.
I've seen Doctor Strange, bro.
Sorry?
I've seen Doctor Strange.
What do you mean?
The Marvel movie, where he uses astral projection.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in a real actual scientific sense. It's actually a real thing.
I think there's so much.
It's a real
out
thing.
of body experience records that I would say to some degree
it's a very real thing. Whether it's in witch societies, whether it's in Hinduism, whether it's in there's a link between all of them as like hidden knowledge to be able to then have out of body experiences to be in another place at the same time. I came across that concept when I was really young, about 10. We had this book. It was at Christian school, and we had this book in there. And it was about all these kind of spooky stuff. And it was kind of put into a spooky story. I think it completely missed the teachers. I don't think it was intentional. It was about spooky stories. And I just remember being a 10-year-old going, wow, so you could like go to someone else's house and whatnot. I didn't know what that sort of stuff was. So I think when you're talking about like hidden knowledge, esoteric practices, these sort of things sort of come into that play. And then when you speak to people, I've listened to individuals who were either witches or warlocks or involved in that sort of stuff at that sort of extreme level, and they would tell you, when you're in that realm, you're unprotected. When your spirit has left your body, you're completely unprotected. You're in a place that is very, very dangerous, and you know, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know to what extent Freemasons at whatever levels would be involved in this sort of stuff. I think they more, at least from what I understand and read, they're more going down the line of you know, how do I put this? From my understanding, it's the level of authority pertains to the level of degeneracy that you're prepared to enter into your life.
All of my research into Freemasonry, and I've tried not to sort of say it because I have no real authority to share what my opinions are and what I've researched, because they're just unfounded, right? But it's a lot of sex and a lot of like coercion, you know, like I don't know why sex is such a powerful thing in these secret societies, but in Freemasonry it was well, from what I've seen, it's very important, you know, plays a big role. And I don't know if that's just, you know, orgies or if it's literally like power plays, you know.
From the surface, like growing up with the lodge, it seemed like the most normal thing. It just seemed like another version of church. But I remember Dad had things. He had friends that would give him things. Like there was a guy up the road from us who owned a printing press of some sorts. And he used to produce like a notebook of $1 notes, proper $1 notes from the bank, and he'd glue the back of it. So you'd open up this pad and you could peel out a $1 note and give it to the store person. So yeah, I remember that because I took Dad's $1 thing and used it at the shop, you know, just to freak out the milk bar owner.
Yeah.
And he's looking at this thing and it was legit. But yeah, I remember there was always something going on in the family that surprised me with Dad knowing these people. So it was like that connection stuff, I suppose.
I'm so shocked that your mum was a Methodist and your father was a Freemason. It's like having a Catholic and you know, I don't know, a Presbyterian in the same
back in
house.
those days, marriage was a big commitment thing. There was shame if you divorced, so you know, kids out of marriage kind of thing. So they would have stuck together regardless.
Yeah, even families would have someone stay in their family. Like I remember Mum talking about they had auntie staying with them, and who was auntie? She was some unwanted child that had happened, and she just stayed with them, and she was called auntie. But she'd never, you know, that was all a big secret within the family. So I feel like when I was growing up, there was a lot of stuff that was probably happening, but families were quite close, you know, they were sort of very secretive. And ours just seemed even more with, you know, Dad going to lodge. I didn't even really understand what the church was about.
Did you ever have a talk to your dad about God and about Jesus?
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
Did your mum seem to try and sway him at least? Because, you know, there's this crazy thing, you know, when I was growing up as a kid, like I never realized mum and dad actually have a history. They actually they met at some point. I wasn't even around and they had a history. So, do you believe in history? Your mum tried to convert your dad?
I remember at Dad's, so I wasn't living at home, probably a month before he passed away. Dad rang me up. There was a falling out and I hadn't spoken to him for a few years. He rang me up. Mum rang up and said, Dad wants you to come home. And I was like, oh, this is another fishing trip, is it? But I actually moved in and I was there for a month prior to him dying or passing away. And in that time, like afterwards, Mum said to me, he started going to church, like literally that time that you moved back in. He started going to church.
Wow.
So
okay.
So I don't know if it was Mum's way of dealing with the past, sort of going, oh, you know, he's been redeemed and now he's going to be in heaven and he understands all the pain he put me through, but he's forgiven because... But yeah, I think, you know, Mum bore a lot of that pain and she would sing hymns, you know, she'd be in the kitchen just singing hymns all the time, sometimes in tears, you know, and I just think, oh, she's just crazy, you know. But now when I look back, I think, you know, it was a terrible time for her that Dad burdened her with it, but lived with it. You know, just...
Man, these kids today, man, they don't get it. You know, you had to knuckle down. You had to dig deep and endure, you know. Yeah, we see it in the divorce rate. I can't imagine that life for your mum, you know. I can tell you now.
And people divorce today because they've fallen out of love.
Yeah.
Well, it's a convenience thing today, you know. It's like I'm ready to move on, so I'll just get divorced. Yeah. But back then, people, I didn't know anyone who was divorced. I didn't have any friends that were, you know, parents separated.
I've heard that it's the dating scene that changed first. So we trained into the youth that if a relationship didn't work, you could just move on. And what it ended up doing was setting the pathways neurologically in their head that even if I get married, if this doesn't work, I can just move on. And that's where it started, you know. So the idea of enduring, you know, forbearing and being patient in a relationship, you know, if you're taught early on, well, you can just have more relationships, it sets the seed of doubt in you. And you sort of look at divorce as, oh, well, you know, it's not that big of a deal, you know. And I think that's true. I think we've done that to some degree with, you know, my generation, you know. But
it's your generation's fault.
Well, you guys were all the Masons, mate. The Freemasons running around with all the women, all right?
Oh,
and who knows what's going on in the lodge.
Probably really related.
Yes, good Scottish blood here and all, you know. The Scots were known to be lots of Freemasons among Scots, that's for sure.
So how is the ratio in your family? So obviously they didn't go to the lodge side. Would you say that your family are Christians, that they believe?
No, so just me and one sister, that's it. So my brother has an inkling. I think he's got a desire and he's got some head knowledge, but I think he struggles with his lifestyle. You know, he's married to or he's yoked to a non-believer. So I think it's very hard. So
I think it's interesting because the argument we often get is, oh, you grew up in a Christian home, that's why you're a Christian, you know, and it's such a genetic fallacy. It's like, bro, do you have any idea how many Christian homes turned people away from Christianity?
Or how many Christian homes, I mean, no disrespect to my siblings, you know, who I know believe that there is a God, but in terms of like I'm going to be not committed to church, but just committed to this life and to live it out, to make mistakes, and it's part and parcel of your world. If people knew just how, like I said, how many people turn away, it's not for them, or it's it's a lot.
So when I was growing up, I was a rebel. I was the bad child,
the black sheep.
Yeah, I was doing all the things bad, And my sisters that weren't Christians were living a good life, like if you could sort of imagine by the law, by the law, they were married, they were in relationship, they weren't sleeping around, they looked after their finances, all that sort of stuff. So they would judge me, for doing all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then when I became Christian, they find it hard not to judge me.
It's
So figure that one out.
Yeah.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
But that's the truth. Like for all of us, would you classify yourself as a fairly new Christian? Maybe the last 6 years.
Yeah, I would say, definitely a novice. Definitely novice.
But I go back, 14 years ago. Maybe 14, 15 years ago, and although we have this discussion, I believe I've known the Lord since I was 6 years old. That doesn't mean all through the teenage years and the 20s, I was always living it to the fullest. And 14 years ago, if I was to talk to my siblings now, they're pretty, I must admit, they're pretty gracious, but you're right. To look at things from the past and then, might go, wow, look at you think you're better than everybody else. Not that my siblings do that, but it's kind of like that, isn't it? It's like you've changed and you just, you're a different person. Your desires have changed. It's not even that you've changed. Something's changed inside you, outside of you. It's not like you've changed. It's just like you wake up and you go, well, I don't like that anymore. I don't know why. I just don't want to do that. I don't want to be around that anymore. And I think I've had that experience in my late 30s, particularly into my 40s, where I can tell you that it wasn't like that in my 20s. Even though I would have said, I'm saved, it would have been like, what I would say is, God sort of had me on this little leash, like, mate, you could go either way. What are you doing? What are you doing? So I totally get it,
It's almost like they can't forgive me for my past.
Yeah.
So they want me to be bound by it. And I am bound by it. I still live with the consequences of my behaviour when I was young. But the grace that God showed me, they can't show me.
I find that that happened with a few of my friends, and particularly a couple of my friends' partners. They knew who I was. They knew how I'd mistreated people. They knew particularly how much fornication was a part of my life, and how I had at certain times in my life treated women very poorly. And the concept to them that I would be forgiven of that was offensive. Offensive, and they definitely held me to it. And all I can say to them is, I'm sorry. I hate that person. But something I find, particularly with born again Christians, is that they understand grace and they understand, look, okay, I am not better than that person. Pride is a big thing, of course, but I think some people have a particular issue with certain sins. Do you think? You obviously believe your mum was saved? You believe she knew the Lord?
Yeah, so Mum's still alive today. She's lost her marbles. She's sitting in dementia in a nursing home. Yeah, sometimes when I go there, she'll hold my hand and she'll just look at me and go, "You're a good boy," Which,
Did she sing a hymn still? She hum a hymn? Do you sing a hymn to her sometimes?
No hymns now. But when she first got dementia, we'd bring in photos of Dad, and she just, I don't know who this bloke is, and she'd point to the picture and you think, you don't know who Dad was, And especially me, I'm thinking, you don't know who that man that tortured you for all those years, you don't know who.
Yeah, praise God.
Who he is.
Look, I think, I don't know your mum, obviously, but to endure that, to go through that, she's obviously a very special person,
And very forgiving.
Yeah, and just tolerant.
So I think Mum was baptised when she was close to 40 years old. So she'd been in the church.
Wow.
Then she started going to a Baptist church and she got baptised. So that was the same church that she would invite me to later on in life. And
man, I always want to get testimonies from Christians. I always do. We are sensitive with time, but I do want to ask, and that's technical sensitive. I just don't have the ability to film more. But I will say this. I know you, Wes. Like I know you're saved. But I have a question for you.
Yep.
Can I ask the question?
Oh, you can ask it today. I'm not going to introduce with my question because it's kind of getting old, a little bit old now. We all know what a woman is, so we're just going to go straight into it now.
I was going to say, what is a woman? And then surprise him, but that's all right. We won't do that. You ruined it for me.
to be fair, I'm kind of getting sick of that discussion in the ether now. It's like It's like if you haven't figured out what a woman is, go to an asylum. You know.
No, go to Big W.
Oh,
There's a book there. You know,
That's our next podcast. Yeah.
What is the gospel? What is the gospel?
What's the gospel? The gospel is a story that's alive for people to experience. It tells of a God who is separated from his people, who needed a way to redeem his people, and it gives that narrative. To me, that's what the gospel is. It's that narrative. It's that narrative that once you read it and you believe it, it lives in you. So it's alive. It's a organic word of God.
If I could ask you, if you were trying to share the gospel with someone, what would you say to them?
If they wanted to hear the gospel, or I just wanted to share it with them?
Either or.
Either or, yeah.
I'd probably just, well, that happened today, actually. So I was in a shop, and I walked into this shop with headphones on, and the guy asked me, he said, "What are you listening to?" And I said, "Oh, a bit of something you'd like." I know this guy because I've dealt with the shop a little bit. "And a bit of something your brother would like." And he goes, "Brother?" And I said, "Your brother's a pastor, isn't he?" And he goes, "Oh, you're talking about gospel music." And I just smiled at him, and he said, "Look, the problem I've got with God is," and that started a 15-minute conversation. Now, I didn't get to share the gospel with him, but I got to interact with him about justice, because that's his thing. He can't understand a just God who would... The situation he gave me was, well, you've got a Muslim man here who is very obedient, but he doesn't believe in Christ. He obeys, he prays, he does all these things, and he dies. Does he go to heaven? I said, no. And he goes, all right, now you've got a sinner. He's just sinning all his life. On his deathbed, he commits and says, I believe in Christ, has forgiven my sins. Does he go to heaven? And I said, yes. And he goes, well, how is that just? I said, well, there's a parable in the Bible that talks about how that is just. You know, but who are we to ask of God what is just? Like, how do we elevate ourselves to question God about what is just? So I don't know. I don't know that I could just come out and say to him, you know, this is the gospel. I'm sure he's heard it before.
His brother's a pastor. Yeah.
So I think sometimes, you know, as a Christian, I find that I'd rather engage with people and understand what their world is, and have them ask me questions and be put on the spot for it and have to answer for it, and just be graceful in that, and then walk away in prayer. You know, I find it really hard just to walk up to someone and say, have you heard the good news? You know,
yeah,
you're
amen.
saved.
Yeah, it is not an easy thing to do. And not only that, I know pastors that can't do it. They literally struggle. They need to either be prompted or very rigorously pushed, you know. I guess it's more of a question that evokes, you know, if you were to make it as simple as possible, what would be the thing that saves us? You know, that's the nature of the question. You said it, you know, if a sinner his whole life got to his deathbed and he asked God for forgiveness, you know, and he believed in Jesus, you know, would he go to heaven? The answer is yes, you know, which I believe, you know, that in and of itself is the gospel, you know.
But isn't that hard to sort of explain to someone that cross is big enough for them and everyone's sins to sit on for forgiveness?
I think we have such a transactional nature in us, humans. You know, it's got to be tit for tat. It can't, you know, there's no such thing as a free gift. You know, that's so deeply ingrained in us that when we hear that God has offered us heaven for free, eternal life for free, we go, nah, what's the catch? I got to be good. I got to be good, right? You know, and we
tend to steer away from this idea that human beings can just go and be good to each other, and you know, help each other, and not get anything for it. That we just do it because, you know, most people, to be fair, you know, a lot of people don't want to do that. It's like they have to get something from it, and yet there's a lot of people who believe that you should just be a good human being and you should just do things just because.
Yep.
Right? And, you know, and there's nothing to gain out of it, which is almost a parallel to what you're saying with the guy who goes his whole life living like a complete dero, gets to the end of it, and God says, you know what, you believed in me, in my sacrifice, and that's the thing. It's got nothing to do with our works will be rewarded in heaven to various degrees. That's scriptural. That's revelation. That's the Bible. They'll be rewarded. You'll be rewarded according to your works, either in damnation, in unbelief, to varying degrees, because God is not unjust, and also salvation. Salvation has got nothing to do with our works. It's salvation. Getting through the pearly gates is the gift of God to those who would believe in the finished work of Christ. And yet the works, the good works that we do as Christians, there are other Christians out there who I look at and I stand back in awe and I go, Lord, I'd like to be like that person, if indeed their heart's genuine, and it just pours out of them, the grace and the good works pour out of them. I'm not going to sit back and say that I should be rewarded in heaven to the same degree that they are. I think that would be unjust.
Look, I think something you're touching on, bro, is really important. The same as what this man is asking, with regards to the good Muslim. He did all that he thought was good, and still at the end of it, does he get to go to heaven? The answer is obviously no, and that's because there's a lot of agnostics or atheists that would say, well, we're good, altruistic, we're good, we want to do well for the society, we want to provide, we want to feed, we want to comfort people, and it really comes down to, well, what is good? What is your standard of good? And is there one outside of you that can set a standard for good? And something I think Frank Turek answers really well. I think there's other people who answer it really well. We think like helping a lady cross the road is good, and the reality is it's like expected. That why would you think it's good? It's expected. Like that's the scraping the bottom of the barrel, and then we look at what we think is bad, and we're like, oh yeah, I stole a little bit. Oh yeah, I cheated a bit. Or, oh yeah, I lied a bit. That's not that bad. But well, whose standard of bad?
I did lesser degree of evil things than someone else.
Yeah.
So one of the questions this guy left me with today when I was leaving the shop, he said to me, so what do you see as your purpose in life? And I stepped back and I thought, this is a bit of a difficult one to answer, but I said, glorifying God with my life is what I think my life's for. But to unpack that, I felt like I would have needed half an hour to say.
You do, bro. You do.
It's not that I can't enjoy life and do all these things. It's just that if God was glorified by what I did, that would be very, very much my purpose.
Yeah. The wonderful thing about Christians is we have an answer to the purpose of life. We're made for the glory of God, and we're made to be in fellowship with Him.
And what should human beings do? We should do what we were designed to do on planet Earth. We're obviously heaven in terms of a new heaven and a new earth and things being reclaimed. That is the destination, or that is the finality of everything when it's all finished. But while we're here, we're supposed to do what we're designed to do, is live for the honor and glory of God. Can we do that in lots of different things? We're doing it right now. We're doing it in our podcast. We're doing it the way we raise our families. We're doing it in the way we eat. We're doing it in the way we drive our car and not have road rage. That's very general in scope. So we're doing the things the way God designed us to do, which is in unison with other people in a symbiotic relationship.
I genuinely believe, I had a conversation with a Christian recently where he just said, no, we can't do anything good. There's nothing we can do good. And I believe without Christ, there's nothing we can do good, But I also believe that there are things that we can do good to glorify and honor God in our lives, This idea that, nothing a Christian tries to do is ever going to be good, I don't think is true. I think there are things we can do that please God, and a pursuit of that in and of itself, a pursuit to serve God well and to do that which He wills, that in and of itself, I think, is a good work, But look, I look at something like Freemasonry, and they're very much set for themselves rules that they'll follow, and I believe, as I was sort of alluding to before, I believe they're aware of God. I believe they're aware of some degree of spirituality.
Ultimate power.
Yeah. And look, is it the God of the Bible? No. Is it Jesus? No. But they definitely, I think the term AA uses is higher power. They believe in a higher power, the all-seeing eye, Look, yeah, that's it, man. All the celebrities do it. Yeah, that's it. Napoleon. Yeah, Napoleon was a Freemason. You know, I don't know if that's true.
Actually, there's a new movie coming out about Napoleon.
Yeah,
Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix is playing him.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, Yodel Phoenix.
Actually looks alright.
Look, he played Jesus. That bothers me.
What?
He played Jesus in a movie.
Oof.
I don't know if it was a series or a movie, but the depiction. Anyway, we're getting way off.
We're getting way off. Hey, we haven't got. We got to go watch Barbie first, all right?
Yes, yes. Margot Robbie promised it was going to make $1 billion, so we'll see how that goes. Wes, thank you very much for coming on and sharing some insights on your family, your life, very private things. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. And
thank you for coming on.
Man, what a unique story. Honestly, you know that I don't think that there would be many kids who grew up with that experience. So,
yeah,
thank you for sharing it. And I would love to have you on more to talk about lots of stuff. We didn't even get into research on the Masonic Lodge and or Freemasonry in general.
How much time have we got? No,
yeah, not enough.
Not enough time.
The Lord will come back.
It is our first session back after a short little spell, so we're feeling a little bit invigorated. So yeah, bravo. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.
Thank you, brother.
Over and out.
Thanks for having me.
Another session of Fringe Frequencies.